All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And happy Hanukkah. It's good to be with everyone. And Rabbi Hal is unfortunately not able to be here today, but wanted to say happy Hanukkah and do a little learning and hear from everyone. Also, if there's kind of a favorite aspect of Hanukkah or any questions around Hanukkah that anyone has had for discussion, and then we'll look at some sources as well around the history of Hanukkah and celebration of Hanukkah. So is there anyone that wants to share a favorite aspect of Hanukkah? No. Okay. So I have a question I guess I'll pose. I think, Amanda, did you want to share? Yeah.
Oh, I have one.
Yeah.
The past few years with the Hanukkah parade, it starts at Legacy Village. And of course, with working retail, nice. I have to work. But I've been able to catch the beginning of the Hanukkah parade. And the past couple of years, sometimes depending on how busy it is, I've talked to some of the people with the parade. In the past few years, someone has always given me a Hanukkah in a box and suf ganiyot. And I think I'm the only one in the store that gets the care package.
The care package.
I told my coworkers, just open your mouths and they'll give you something.
Right. Good. Okay, great. No, and there's something though about adding light and adding joy with the parade and care packages. Good. So I wanted to oh yeah, Cheryl. Yeah, Cheryl.
Yeah, I like lighting candles with my family. And thank goodness for Zoom, because family is all out of town. And we have a Zoom date for Tuesday to light candles together.
Good. Yeah, no, I think although, it's been a very challenging few years with COVID, one perhaps silver lining is that is greater ability for everyone to be able to connect regardless of location, right? So it's glad that you're able to celebrate, even if not physically close or connected via our devices. Yeah, Jackie. Jacqueline?
Yeah. One of the things that I enjoyed is when my family was here, if we had the 8th night of Hanukkah, I would invite all my friends and we would all light, I'd turn off the lights in my house and we would, every surface had a Hanukkah lit, with the 9 candles. And my daughter used to say, I think we have to call the fire department. But it was beautiful.
Okay, good. No, beautiful. And
actually, Jackie, if you were with us yesterday, you would have learned from Rabbi Marquise that everybody should light their candles in a different window, that they should be spread out. They shouldn't all be together.
Good. And you can share with us, do you want to share with us the reason?
Because, one of the reasons is so you could tell how many, if you have all the candles in one place, you can't tell what day it is because you can't count the candles.
Okay.
So if you have to keep them separate. And it's also so you can publicize it in more directions.
Right.
I have windows all around in my house. And so we did have them spread out.
Good. So, so that traditionally the reason given in the Talmud, for lighting the Hanukkah candles in the first place is Pirsume Nisa, publicizing the miracle. And so all the more so you can publicize even more greatly if you have Chanukiot in many windows. Although at the same time, the Talmud also suggests that you can fulfill the mitzvah of Hanukkah by just lighting one candle each night. And I know, Ron, I'll just mention briefly, because I know that some were there yesterday morning. There's an interesting conundrum where we say the first blessing, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, that God sanctified us with God's commandments, giving us the mitzvah, the commandment of lighting, kindling the Hanukkah lights. And as I'm sure you're probably aware, if you search through the Torah to find this mitzvah of lighting the Hanukkah lights, where can you find it? Nowhere, right? Not even anywhere in the Bible, let alone in the Torah. So
yeah, it's not in the Tanakh, it's only in the Talmud.
Right. Just in the Talmud, but
that's true about the Shabbos candles too, though, isn't it?
Well, yes and no. The Torah does say that we should have Oneg Shabbat. And the rabbis which means kind of joy, have a joyous celebration on Shabbat. And the rabbis of the Talmud claim that how can you have joy on Shabbat without being able to see for your Shabbat dinner? And in times before electricity, there wouldn't have been light without fire. So while I tend to agree with you to some degree, it doesn't say you need to light Shabbat candles. The rabbis of the Talmud argue that it comes from the Torah because, of course, Oneg Shabbat means you must be having Shabbat candles.
Well, and there's a difference between Shabbat candles and Hanukkah candles. Shabbat candles, you're allowed to use them for light. Hanukkah candles are just supposed to be kind of decorative. You're not allowed to use them for the light.
Right, exactly. In fact, right, Shabbat candles originally probably were primarily used for the light. And Hanukkah candles, dafka, are not supposed to be used to light up a room, but rather just to publicize the miracle, and shouldn't be used as a source of light for
not utilitarian.
Jacqueline? Oh, yes, correct. But good. It's always struck me that Hanukkah falls the same time as many religions' holidays, at this darkest time of year, all focusing around light and adding light to a time that's otherwise very dark. In fact, I think we have our darkest day of the year, the winter solstice, in just a couple days. And so how did it come to be that Hanukkah was celebrated right at this time? Did the battle actually took place over a course of 3 years? We do understand this from the story, the history, that it happened around this time of year that the temple was rededicated. But want to share a few different reasons given in Jewish text for the 8 days of celebration and the lights that we use that are so core to the celebration of Hanukkah. And I'm searching. Has anyone heard is anyone familiar with the books of the Maccabees? First of all, I'll share. Ron?
Well, I know there's 4 of them.
Right. So there are 4 books of the Maccabees. They're Greek books. They don't make it into our Bible. They make it in, 2 of them make it into works which are known as the Apocrypha, which is a collection of texts from biblical times that don't make it into the Jewish Bible. In fact, there's some debate that's recorded in the Mishnah and in the Talmud that there was some debate over whether some of these later books in the Bible should be included or not. The books of the Maccabees do not, and in fact, the latter 2 books of the Maccabees don't make it into the Apocrypha either. They're what's known in English or Latin as the Pseudepigrapha, which are kind of other works from around this time that don't make it into any canon, essentially. But what's interesting, right? And Rob?
All 4 of them make it into the Christian canon, don't they?
Well, the Apocrypha.
I know the first 2.
Included.
I know the first 2 do. I wasn't sure about 3 and 4.
So I actually am not sure. I don't think 3 and 4 do, although I can double check that. I'm not 100% positive. The first 2 books of the Maccabees make it into the Apocrypha, which is typically included in Christian scripture. Yes. And in fact, if anyone is interested in this topic, a quick plug, an email will go out this week. But for those of you who've been joining the Thursday night Spotlight Educators courses, for January, our teacher is actually going to be Rabbi Noah Bickart, the Dean of Religious Studies at John Carroll University. And his topic will be a Jewish approach to Christian scripture. It should be a fascinating exploration of this time period and how Jewish texts and sources kind of approach Christian writings of this time. So a quick plug to join on Thursday evenings in January, if you're interested in learning more. But here I'm going to pull up from the book, the second book of the Maccabees, what is said about what is said about the holiday of Hanukkah. So let me make sure that you can see. Is there anyone that would like to read here where it says, just the part, the sanctuary was purified on the 25th day of Kislev? I'm going to see if I can make it a little bigger here, actually. So, is there anyone that wants to read here where it says the sanctuary was purified?
I'll read.
Okay, thank you.
The sanctuary was purified on the 25th of Kislev, the same day of the same month as that on which foreigners had profaned it. The joyful celebration lasted for 8 days, like the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, and then they recalled how, only a short time before, they had kept that feast while living like wild animals in the mountains and caves. So carrying garland wands and flowering branches, as well as palm fronds, i.e. the ritual symbols of Sukkot, they chanted hymns to the one who so triumphantly achieved the purification of his own temple.
Okay, so we'll stop there. So any thoughts here? This is the second book of Maccabees. This is much more contemporaneous with the actual historical events of Hanukkah, which happened 165 to 162 BCE. The book of the Maccabees says it was purified the 25th day of Kislev, which is the same day we, of course, still celebrate Hanukkah today. But the reason for celebrating 8 days was because a few months earlier, the holiday of Sukkot, which is 7 days plus Shmini Atzeret, is an 8-day celebration. Normally, everyone comes to the temple. It was impossible a few months earlier because the temple was profaned, was not accessible, was not purified. And so now they had taken back the temple, purified it. So we're going to be able to celebrate Sukkot in the temple for 8 days just a few months later. And so here's this great 8-day celebration. Any thoughts on this story of 8 days of celebrating here on rededicating the temple?
Well, it gives us the reason for the 8 days for Hanukkah.
Right. It gives us a reason, very different from the reason that we teach today or talk about today. But it gives a reason for 8 days, which in my eyes makes some sense and is actually much more contemporaneous. This story and the book of the Maccabees is written not long after the events of the holiday of the historical event themselves.
The original dedication of the temple in Solomon's time, how many days was that?
Good. Also, 8 days.
Was that 8 or was it 12?
I believe also 8 days because it actually refers in, I believe, the third book of the Maccabees. It gives a different reason for 8 days, and it says that it's to remember how the temple was originally dedicated.
Now, the Mishkan, on the other hand, was 12 days. It was 1 day for each tribe.
The Mishkan is 1 for 12, correct. The Mishkan was dedicated and each tribe gave gifts. Correct. I mean, in fact, that's the Torah reading is, if, for anyone that heard, right, that's the Torah reading throughout Hanukkah because that's the closest parallel, or was seen as the closest parallel in the Torah to the holiday of Hanukkah was the dedication of the Mishkan, which occurs in the Torah. But 2 reasons are given in the different books of the Maccabees for 8 days of celebration. One relating to a re-celebration after the fact of the holiday of Sukkot, and the other to celebrate the dedication of the temple, to the rededication with the way that they looked back to the books of the prophets and looked at what happened in King Solomon's time and saw 8 days of celebration, 8 days of dedication, and copied that model here for the rededication.
Do you know what the reason was for 8 days for that?
I don't believe that it gives us a reason for 8 days. I need to look back. I don't recall the text telling us a reason for the 8 days for dedication. I can look, see if I can find something. But in the meantime, where does the story of the 8 days of oil come from? It comes from the Talmud. In fact, there's very little mention, interestingly, of Hanukkah. Certainly it doesn't appear in the Bible at all. Even in the Talmud, there's just a couple of pages that actually talk about Hanukkah at all in the entire corpus of the Talmud. But of course, that is where we see the story, and I can pull up just to read quickly the text from the Talmud itself, My Chanukah. It doesn't have its own section, but actually appears in here. I'm gonna look. It's in Shabbat, in the tractate of Shabbat, Daf Kaf Aleph 21. After this, meaning the defeat of the Syrian Greek army, the sons of Israel went up to the temple and rebuilt its gates and purified the temple from the dead bodies and from the defilement. And they sought after pure olive oil to light the lamps therewith, but could not find any, except one bowl that was sealed with the signet ring of the high priest from the days of Samuel the prophet, and they knew that it was pure. There was in it enough oil to light the lamps therewith for 1 day, but the God of heaven, whose name dwells there, put therein his blessing, and they were able to light from it for 8 days. Therefore, the sons of Hashmonai made this covenant and took upon themselves a solemn vow, they and the sons of Israel, all of them, to publish amongst the sons of Israel to the end that they might observe these 8 days of joy and honor as the days of the feasts written in the book of law, even to light in them so as to make known to those who come after them that their God wrought for them salvation from heaven. So I'll stop there. So I'm not to say what happened or what didn't happen, and there's no way to know for sure from something that happened over 2,000 years ago, but the first mention of this story of the oil lasting for 8 days occurs probably roughly 500 years or so after the fact. It would be like us just saying what happened, when Christopher Columbus discovered the New World in 1492. And maybe there's some history or some tale that's backing it up, but there's also a lot of skepticism around, did this really happen the way it's described in the Talmud, where rabbis are discussing it nearly, half a millennium after the fact. So any thoughts on the reasons the rabbis might have this story, regardless of its historicity, why they might tell this story rather than the story, one of the stories shared in the books of the Maccabees?
Because it involves God directly.
Right, so there's a rabbinic desire to connect God and to connect God with the story and not just military might. We also connect God with the military might of victory, but certainly in its time, leaders might not have ascribed God to the victory, could say, oh, these were just powerful warriors and they were able to defeat this army. This story is very tied to nothing. It can't be anything other than God in the story. And right, so I agree, right? The desire to connect God very specifically to the story of Hanukkah may have helped to make Hanukkah a more Jewish celebration. History tells us, and historical sources say, that Jews were celebrating holidays with lights, and we're going to look at a different source right now that probably reaffirms and confirms the fact that it was not uncommon for all peoples to be celebrating with light at the darkest times of the year. We see many of our Christian neighbors, Christmas, the celebration of lights at a dark time. And in fact, historical sources are actually more clear that Jesus was actually born in late spring. I don't know if you've seen the Christian sources talk about Jesus being born in June. It very likely, and I'm not a scholar here, but very likely that Christian leaders saw that people were celebrating with lights at the end of the year, much like was a Roman and Greek festival, Saturnalia in Roman times. There were pagan holidays that were celebrating with light at the darkest time of the year to try to bring joy and light to dark times. That was likely widespread, and just like there's a Jewish rabbinic attempt to connect God to the celebration of light in dark times, Christian leaders tried to connect something very formative to their own religion to a celebration that probably was being celebrated by many people around the world, regardless of religion at this darkest time of year. I'm going to share one final source here.
I
Yeah,
had a
Eric.
slight comment on that. I also
Yeah.
heard that they actually don't know when, within like a period of 4 years, when Jesus was actually born.
Well, right, that's true as well. The year is in some doubt, and I've seen, most scholars who say that Jesus was born 4 BCE, which is somewhat ironic since the dating system is really based on based on Jesus in many ways, and the Roman Empire kind of putting forward that
They had to wait for his upshuring.
right.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
But in terms of time of year, which is really the moment here, the darkness in some ways is cause for worry and for wanting to add light. Particularly, light is always beautiful, and I think there's a lot of connection to light, and the importance and meaning and connection to light, and many of you shared, and to me as well, kind of the most beautiful thing about Hanukkah for me is spreading this light and in many ways kind of illuminating a time which is dark. It's somewhat depressing to me that you get home from work or whatever you're doing, and 5 o'clock it's already kind of dark outside. To be able to add light is always joyous. So I'm gonna share a source on celebrating in darkness, and we'll see that this is a source around the same time of year, the winter solstice, but has nothing to do with Hanukkah. This is a source in the Midrash. So I'm gonna try to put it up on the screen here. I'm gonna get the beginning. Sorry about. I'm gonna try to. Here, just a second. This is from the Midrash. Avodah. It's actually it's in the it's a Midrash that's found in the Talmud. Avodah Zarah, page 8. The Talmud relates that during the first ever winter, right? So Adam, the first man, has never seen winter before. He grew afraid. He saw that nights were getting longer and the days were gradually getting shorter. With no knowledge of the cycles of the world or the nature of seasons, Adam reached the obvious conclusion. The world was being destroyed because of his sins. Every day was getting shorter until, right, the days would continue to get shorter. And eventually, eventually there would be no light at all. Eventually, he calculated, he would be left alone in a world of eternal darkness, a world that had returned to a state of pre-creation and primordial chaos. Terrified, Adam fasted and prayed for 8 days, hoping to avert the world's destruction. On the 9th day, however, something changed. On the 9th day, the day after the winter solstice, the day was slightly longer than it had been the day before. As Adam watched, waiting and hoping, the days continued to grow longer and the nights shorter. Adam realized at this point that what he had assumed was a punishment for his sins was actually nature, the way of the world. In celebration, Adam marked the next 8 days as Yamim Tovim. So this is a story about the first human being, the first person, Adam, watching, thinking the world was slowly coming to an end as days were getting shorter. But as he saw the winter solstice pass and days starting to get longer, Adam, the first man, marked this 8 days of celebration and of light, of celebrating, the return of light. And the text that this is based on, which actually is an earlier Midrashic text, comes from around the first century of the Common Era, also refers to it as a celebration of light. So before I share anything about this story, any thoughts about this story here?
Well, because even Bereshit, the big culmination of Bereshit is God said, "Let there be light." So light was something wonderful.
Right, light, no, good. Light is the very first creation, right? Yehi or. Light is created before anything else, right?
And it enabled other things too.
True, right. Without light in some ways needs to be the first creation, because without light, what is everything else matter if it's not able to be seen or used, right? So this text has struck me in part because, right, it clearly is referring to an 8-day celebration, which we still celebrate, although not with this story in mind. But it's talking about the 8 days, right around the winter solstice, which we celebrate as Hanukkah. And I've always been curious about this story, and if this was a tale that, on the one hand, really predated Hanukkah. Maybe it was also like the story that was told in the Talmud, another way of kind of ascribing these holidays to something other than a military victory that might be tied to something other than God, but tied to Adam, the first human being. And of where does this story fit into our understanding of Hanukkah, or of celebrating light in the darkest times? I'm going to turn to any thoughts, before I share some thoughts that I've had about this story. Okay, so
I guess
Eric.
sort of on a parallel, I had a question
Mhm.
because I thought that later on the military victory actually has, if you look at the Al Nisim, that the actual victory was God's work.
Right. No, so certainly, and Al Hanisim,
So-
which we say during the Amidah, right, every day during Hanukkah, doesn't talk about the miracle of the oil. It's the miracle is the military victory.
Yeah, and that also got extended from even to the 1967 war. There's some, I think some of the Al Nisim, excuse me, Al Nisim we say for like Independence Day, Israel Independence Day later, also have that same language.
Right. Many Jews, you're right. That same Al Hanisim, the first couple lines of Al Hanisim, are used for today in many Jewish congregations. We do it as well at B'nai Yeshurun. Al Hanisim for Yom HaAtzmaut, for Israel's independence in 1948, ascribing this godly miracle. So what I was saying is not that it's not a miracle. In many ways, I see this as a core miracle of Hanukkah. As it is really the historical might of this small group that's not challenged actually in ancient sources.
And also going with that is that it was actually a war against assimilation, because the people at that time were getting very Hellenized, and
Right.
Mattathias in particular was very concerned about that, and that actually was a very difficult time. Even after the victory later on, it was still a big problem.
Right, and that's one thing I want to come to. But you're 100% right. The victory of Hanukkah, and we often talk about it as a victory over the Syrian Greek army, but the reality is that there were many Jews that for whom the Syrian Greek culture was very appealing to. In fact, right, there's a story in the books of Maccabees where Mattathias comes and kills one of the the Jews who is kind of as completely assimilated and adopted Greek way of life. The battle the Maccabees are waging is not only against the Greeks, but really it's against
Idolatry.
the Hellenized Jews. Right. And we see some parallels even to today. It's not necessarily being forced upon us in the same way, but we see a battle for the Jewish soul, even among many Jews who are completely assimilated today. So Eric, completely correct. And one of the downfalls, as I was going to come to later, the Hasmoneans, the family of the Maccabees, actually, in some ways miraculously takes over and controls and rules the country of Israel, as something that wasn't seen. Jewish rule over the land of Israel wasn't seen again after the Hasmoneans for 2,000 years until 1948. But one of the things that leads to the Hasmoneans' downfall after about 100 years of rule is that they kind of do to others what was done to the Jewish people, kind of, this push for Jews to become Greek. The Hasmoneans pushed the Idumeans, who's a neighboring population, and forcibly convert them, essentially, say, you really need to become part of the Jewish people. And causes a lot of animosity from this neighboring people. And in fact, Herod, who is appointed by the Romans as the leader of the Roman prefect of Israel, is in fact a Jew whose family was forcibly converted to Judaism among the Idumeans, and has a challenged relationship with the Jews in part because of that. And so it's an interesting part of the story that really comes after the story of Hanukkah, that we think about it as a fight for religious freedom, but in many ways the undoing of the Maccabees' descendants, their children and grandchildren, is the forced conversion of another population into Judaism, and leads ultimately to disarray and to bringing Herod, who is Jewish but forcibly of a family that was forcibly converted. And at least to my knowledge, is the only time in history that Jewish leaders forcibly converted another population into Judaism. Actually, one of very few times in history where Jews had the power to do such a thing. As much of Jewish history, Jews weren't in control. But in some ways, a sad ending to the Hasmonean dynasty, kind of falling victim to some of the things the Maccabees and Hasmoneans were originally fighting for. So thank you, Eric, for bringing that up. So this story, coming back to the story of Adam and lights at the darkest time, I see it, and I think it comes in the Midrash because it is very likely, in fact, we know from history that Jews, among many other people, were celebrating with light, a holiday that was just generally celebrated. I see some challenge, and we see some of this challenge in the United States, that Christmas being so widely celebrated, it's tempting to want to celebrate with lights. I see it even in our own children. My daughter is 3 years old, and she's learned that we don't celebrate Christmas, we celebrate Hanukkah, but she loves looking at the lights everywhere. And who can blame her? It's beautiful to look at all the lights everywhere. And you can understand a desire to put up lights to celebrate with light. And I see this story of Adam much in the same way that the story of the miracle of the oil and trying to connect God was what I said, Eric, earlier. We definitely see the miracle of the military victory as a godly miracle. But it could be seen by those who won, or even others. It could be attributed just to those winning. It's easier to see some saying, "Oh, that wasn't God. It just was a powerful army," right? And if you're devout, you can see God in everything. And we certainly attribute God to the miracle of the small defeating the mighty. But
to not pile on, but to add,
Mhm.
to continue on with that thought, even losing would have been from God. I mean, like the destruction of the temple, that's from God.
Right.
It
The
had
Jewish,
nothing to do with it had nothing to do
Right.
with the Romans. It had to do with the Jews not following God's commands, and God did that through the Romans.
right, 100%. That's the biblical and Talmudic way of understanding the world, is really through God's hand. The temple wasn't destroyed because the Romans were more powerful than the Jews. It was destroyed because of sinat chinam, that the Jews, there was senseless hatred among the Jewish people, 100%. So it's the Jewish way, you might say, to attribute everything, both good and bad, to God. But it wasn't everyone's way in the world. And so therefore, while it is true that our text definitely attributes the military victory to God, it was easier for the rabbis to sell this was assuredly only God, and not human hands involved. When you look at oil that's only supposed to last for 1 day, their human hands have nothing to do with that oil lasting for 8 days. And no one can argue otherwise, is really the gist of the point. But I think this midrash
Well,
is
the other half of the oil lasting for 8 days was it was supposed to take 8 days to make new oil.
right. That's from the Talmudic story.
I was in your whatever class that was, where whatever his name was, it came and we made the kids made
Right.
oil from the olives in 15 minutes. So what took 8 days to make oil?
Good. So right. So Ron is alluding, he's mentioning. So we did a project right before Hanukkah with our students, our 3rd through 6th grade students, to learn about the oil and to actually make some olive oil. And they had the opportunity to get olives and to put them and smash the olives to get juice from the olives and oil. And we made with a centrifuge, which I don't think they had back then. We're able to make olive oil much more quickly, but not enough olive oil that would have been needed to light the menorah each day. But we saw the process of making oil is a long process, right? How long, I don't know. According to tradition and according to the Talmud, it would have taken 8 days. That 8 days referred to going out to picking the olives, going to the olive trees, to picking the olives, getting the olives, smashing them all, and doing all of the work to make the oil. I can't attest to the fact that it really takes 8 days, but it would have been more than what our students did with the olives already pre-picked before them and having a centrifuge. Which
I have to admit, I forgot about the centrifuge.
But
I was just thinking about the olive press.
Right, but even there, you would need to go and get the olives and bring them to the press. So only a small amount of oil was considered pure enough to use. So it took a long time to gather enough of that oil to light. So whether or not it took exactly 8 days, that was considered the amount of time that it would take to get enough oil. But you're right, the 8 days was enough time so that more oil could be brought to light the menorah. So that being said, I think the story about Adam and the light is evidence that Jews were celebrating a holiday of lights. And even the story of Hanukkah itself and the historical story of Hanukkah may be a way to attribute some historical event, major event, with a holiday that Jews were probably already celebrating. Maybe not every Jew, but there was a Greek holiday that already was in fashion. And the Greek holiday likely had earlier roots, if not to Adam at the very beginning of humanity, very early roots with a desire to add light to the darkest times of the year, to make it more palatable in these dark times. It might not have been as dark in the Middle East and the ancient Near East as it is here because it's a little further south. I can only imagine the kinds of lights ancient tribes were using in Alaska or Scandinavia or places where it really was dark almost the entire day. but we know, from history across religions and across the world, holidays of light at the darkest times of the year was something that's been done from time immemorial. And it's a way of adding light and joy to a time that otherwise can be somewhat dark and depressing. And so all of these stories, I think that, not that the story, I mean, there's historical, we have the historical record of the holiday of Hanukkah. But to celebrate, during this darkest time of year, in some ways, as all of these stories are adding meaning to a time that we want to be able to celebrate, a time that we want to be able to add light. And I think that's why, for many of us still today, the idea of lighting, of being with family, of adding light at this darkest time of the year is something that resonates still to this day, thousands of years later. And I think it's wonderful to be able to celebrate all three of these stories, and perhaps add stories of our own for Hanukkah, but to be able to celebrate the victory of the military might of the Maccabees and this fight for religious freedom, celebrate the godliness in the menorah and in the oil, as well as celebrating this story from time immemorial, the story of Adam, the first human being, celebrating that the world is not coming to an end. Something that, today we understand the cycle of the world, and we know that, God willing, we'll see warm weather, eventually, and not God willing in Cleveland, you never know, but we'll see warm weather again, and can already be able to think ahead to summer vacation and to all of the things we'll be able to do when we're able to go outside. And Lynn may be sitting there in Florida where it's not quite as cold as here. And
I dare not complain, but it was 55 this morning.
Well, so maybe not as warm as it could be there, but still probably 30 degrees warmer than it is in Cleveland today. But there are many reasons to celebrate, I think, Hanukkah, and to celebrate at this time of year. And this story of Adam, which likely is helping add a godly component and a Jewish component to something that people were already celebrating, is part of our celebration as well, I think, and something that we don't often hear the story of, but I think is part and parcel of, the celebration of lights. I think also to celebrating by giving presents on Hanukkah, which is something that wasn't part of Jewish tradition. It's not, in the books of the Maccabees. It's not something that's talked about in the Talmud. In Eastern Europe, the tradition developed of giving gelt, of giving money, which is as kind of a transition to giving chocolate money, chocolate gelt. And coins, but giving presents is really something that's adopted. Right,
you had to have the gelt in order to play dreidel.
Right. Well, yes. Right. You needed the gelt.
They go together.
Gamble it away. They do go hand in hand. But present giving is not something that's in the ancient stories, and in many ways we see it as part of the commercialized nature in some ways of the holiday, and mirroring, what our Christian neighbors are doing. But in some ways, I lament the fact that Hanukkah has in some ways been taken away from its roots. But in many other ways, I see it as part and parcel of what Hanukkah probably has always been. Co-opting things that were happening in the world, under a pagan guise, or under the guise of something that wasn't Jewish, and Judaizing it and making it part of our tradition. And to some degree, that's been done across holidays, probably for time immemorial, probably throughout, thousands of years. Even our three pilgrimage festivals fall at the times of year when the harvest was being celebrated. Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuot are all times of harvest. And our ways, even biblically, a lot of biblical scholars talk about the ways that Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuot, which are so core to our tradition right in the Torah, may also be at the times of year that they are at, in part because, they celebrate the harvest. Sukkot in particular, which doesn't have a specific, moment in time. Sukkot historically celebrates the 40 years of wandering in the desert, and God, God's cloud, which the schach represents, is something that happens over 40 years. So why does it davka need to take place at the moment of the fall harvest? We
The
could
Torah
argue
says so, that's why.
the Torah says so, but biblical scholars will argue the Torah says so in part because it's also, a holiday that celebrates the harvest.
Yeah, I think, as long as we're talking about lights, I think it's very interesting to notice how many of our holidays are at full moons. I mean, Sukkot, Pesach, Purim, those are the ones that come to mind immediately, but there's others.
No, and I would actually say, Davka, think about the fact that Hanukkah, where we add light to the darkness, actually falls at the time of the new moon when there is no light from the moon. The 25th day of Kislev, going over Rosh Chodesh, which is really the darkest time, the darkest time of the month in terms of being at night without having the moonlight. So there's no question, Ron, our calendar follows a lunar cycle. The Jewish calendar is a lunar cycle, and the holidays fall typically in the middle of the month with a full moon, or at the beginning of the month, Rosh Chodesh, with the new moon. And Hanukkah falls at this time that it coincides with the darkest nights of the month, in addition to the darkest days of the year, so that you really have those darkest days. But without question, right, both Sukkot and Passover fall in the middle of the month with the full moon. And it's interesting and perhaps not coincidental today that Hanukkah falling at this time of year is among the most celebrated holidays, or at least the lights are among the most celebrated rituals for Jews in this country and around the world. But we know in the most recent study, the Pew report from about 8 or 9 years ago, there was a listing to try to gather a sense of what rituals Jews were performing. And while only, I don't remember the exact number, but only about 18% of Jews are lighting Shabbat candles regularly and having Shabbat dinner, and a similar number or fewer going to shul on some regular basis. Even the high holidays, which we think of as the time that everyone comes to shul, it's only about half of the population in this country. Maybe 55% of Jews in this country are coming to shul on the high holidays. When asked about lighting Hanukkah candles or being part of a candle lighting celebration, 82% of American Jews, 4 in 5 Jews, say they light Hanukkah candles. Whereas only half even come to shul on the high holidays, and much lower for anything else. The only other celebration that comes close to the Hanukkah candles is having or attending some sort of Passover Seder, which 79% of Jews in this country said they do. So Passover, and even slightly more say the Hanukkah lights, but those two are really the most observed holiday traditions. I will share though, right, as Passover is discussed at length in the Torah and in the Talmud, and the Passover Seder is filled with halachic ritual, the candle lighting is something that doesn't appear in the Bible at all, and yet is still being so widely celebrated, even though, as we know from Jewish community, is just a minor celebration and minor holiday. You wouldn't know that, of course, from looking around and seeing it paralleled with other holidays, which may very well also be, especially in the case of Christmas, a holiday that was put at this time, or was added to at this time because people were simply celebrating at this time celebrations that date back thousands and thousands of years. So with that, right, I think there's both.
I believe that both Christmas and Halloween were takeovers of pagan holidays that already existed.
Yes, no, and that's likely correct. That's likely correct. And that's, in part why, I think Christian leaders kind of ascribe Jesus's birth and this miraculous birth to Christmas, to this time of year, when Christian sources are actually pretty definitive that Jesus was actually born in the spring and not in the winter. They actually moved. In the story of Hanukkah, the Jewish texts do say that it happened at this time of year, at least.
Following Jewish tradition, wouldn't it make sense that Jesus would have been born on Good Friday, the day he died?
Well, that I can't speak to.
I mean, there are a few instances that I can't think of who right off the top of my head were born and died on the same date.
Oh, okay.
And so and so if you're saying he was born in the spring, I'm saying he's probably born on Good Friday.
Well, not according to Christian tradition, but I hear what you're saying, right? We believe that's ascribed that the Messiah in Jewish tradition, and join Rabbi Noah Bickart's class because he's much more expert in this topic than me. But it's said that King David lived for 70 years and was born and died on the same day, and we have a tradition that the Messiah will be born on Tisha B'Av. There's a strong tradition that the 9th day of Av, which right now is the saddest day of the Jewish year, will one day in the Messianic era become a great day of joy and celebration, and is believed to be when the Messiah will be born. But we do have this belief. It's also believed that Adam and Eve were born and died on the same day. This ascription that holy people, that the holiest of people and connected with the Messianic era of being born and dying on the same day. But that's in the realm of more in the realm of mysticism, I would say. Yeah, Amanda, did you want to share anything, Amanda, or just
No.
oh,
Okay.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
No, so really, kind of the final kind of thoughts. There's a lot happening here. But I think, the idea of lights at the darkest times is something that probably is an idea the world over. It's not solely a Jewish idea. But Hanukkah allows us to bring this idea into Jewish terms. Both the victory of military might of the Maccabees, this small group, showing this pride in Jewish, showing this tremendous Jewish pride. In fact, right, the menorah, which is really a symbol of Hanukkah, both the military might and the connection to God in the oil is the symbol that was taken by the Jewish state. The emblem of Israel is the menorah. It's placed right outside. There's a large menorah, 7-branch candelabra, right in front of the Knesset. For anyone that has been to the Knesset in Jerusalem, there is this menorah, which serves as the symbol, and I think it serves. It was certainly a major symbol of the temple, but it connects us to this moment of Hanukkah, which is among the most widely observed and celebrated holidays still to this day of the Jewish people. And it's not a symbol relegated to history, in part because the Jews have kept it alive for thousands of years. And whether it is because of the military victory, the small defeating the mighty, of the Maccabees, whether it's because of the story of the oil miraculously lasting for 8 days, whether it's because of the story of light returning to our world after a period of darkness, which is kind of codified in this midrash of Adam, and is a celebration of light that we share with religions around the world, be it Christmas or Diwali or other celebrations, even dating back to pagan times, as Ron, correctly, I think, suggests, and scholars do show that Halloween as well, but that these are celebrations that kind of have been co-opted by many religions based on pagan tradition that was happening even earlier. There's a lot that we can connect with and be proud of the lights that we get to celebrate at this time of year. And I think the state of Israel also recognized in its early days, the power of that light in choosing the menorah as an enduring symbol for the modern state of Israel as well. So I want to wish everyone a Chag Sameach, and we'll turn if there's anything that anyone wants to share, any words, any questions.
I guess I'll mention that in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., there's a very, very large menorah on the ellipse that Chabad Lubavitch light, and we've been to that lighting a few times. It's actually quite something. They usually get a high-ranking member of the government to be there, and last night I heard it was the Secretary of State. So we've been to a few, not yesterday, but we've been to a few of them. It's actually quite moving.
Good, very nice. Yeah, no, it is a beautiful. I was there once as well.
That actually leads me to a question about halakha. Can a non-Jew light a menorah? Excuse me, a Hanukkah?
Why not?
Well, there's nothing that forbids a non-Jew from lighting it.
And then to have a Jew say the blessing.
But
would that be
I believe, the mitzvah is for us.
Or do you have to do it yourself?
To light the mitzvah is for us to light the Chanukiah. The best way to do it is for each person to light their own Chanukiah. I would say, while there's nothing wrong with a non-Jew lighting it, the best way to perform the mitzvah of lighting the Chanukiah is to light one for you or for your household, which would mean the Jewish person lighting the Chanukiah to fulfill the mitzvah.
So I guess
there's nothing wrong with going to an event, and certainly for someone who's not Jewish to speak at a candle lighting. I don't know that the government official is lighting the Chanukiah. I don't think so. So
just one last question. When my parents were living at Myers, they don't allow flames of any kind. So they have to have only electric. So how does that actually, you're not really lighting anything, and how is that viewed halakhically?
So it's still important. It's still Pirsume Nisa, publicizing the miracle. The truth is that the mitzvah is to kindle flames, but the reality is that in the time that these mitzvot were established and the Talmud was written, there was no such thing as electricity. It wasn't something that was known or existed in those times. So there's debate about that. Many people say some say that you should still light a flame, but some say that, an electronic where it's not possible to light, to light a candle, it still is good to light an electronic flame. So there's a debate about that in text, but in my eyes, best to light the candle where possible. But if it's not possible, you're still kind of fulfilling the mitzvah of Pirsume Nisa, of publicizing the light by putting an electronic light at your, in your home or at your window.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Lynn?
Oh, when my son was a freshman in college, I sent him an electric menorah,
Right.
and it played some music. And when I ordered it, it said it was good for hospitals, prisons, and nursing homes.
Right. No, it is right. So there's a sense, even in the most traditional world today, there are certain places where flames are just not allowed. And so therefore you can, it's a b'diavad. The Talmud has cases where it wouldn't be the first preference in terms of the way to fulfill the mitzvah. But if you're in a place where it's not possible to perform it in the most ideal way, this counts as performing the mitzvah.
When I was in college, I just didn't tell anybody, and I lit candles.
Yeah, right. College dorms,
and put it in the window so everybody could see that I did it.
Right.
But I didn't tell anybody. But I mean,
Well.
as far as the electric goes, I would follow the halacha according to Ron would be, if you consider electricity prohibited, turning on and off electricity prohibited on Shabbat, then it counts as a candle. But if you can use electricity or electronics on Shabbat, then it's not a candle. And therefore it can't count as lighting the menorah.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh, I get it.
What didn't count?
I said, it depends on how you feel about electricity on Shabbat.
Oh, okay.
If turning on a light on Shabbat is permissible, then it's not permissible to use that as the candle on the Hanukkah.
Well, interesting. So I don't know. I can't speak to that, but it makes sense. But to Eric's question, it still is fulfilling the mitzvah if it's in a place where lighting the candles are not permitted.
Okay, thanks.
But good. So thank you to everyone. Great to see everyone. Just a note, there isn't going to be a What's New class the next 2 weeks. They're both actually national holidays observed. And I know Rabbi Rudin-Lurie is out of town next Monday as well. So we're out, but in 2023, I think January 9th is everything will be back. I want to wish everyone a Chag Sameach, happy Hanukkah. And if I don't see you before then, Happy New Year as well.